topic yesterday was an example of a 17-year-old that experienced a crime, just turned 18. So they have what? How much time do they have? 24. So that gives them 6 years versus the 3, right? So as long as there's some type of documentation of the crime actually occurred at 17, so that means that they have additional time, right? Criminal backgrounds are no longer considered disqualifiers, but also you have to take in mind, all the other things that were listed previously, right, that can disqualify you. So oftentimes people with a background, will be disqualified only because of who's actually validating that you're a victim, right? And that'll make more sense, as we move forward. Possession of a felony drug at the time of the underlying incident is no longer a disqualifier. Applicants who were previously disqualified based on their criminal background or drug possessions may refile their application, provided that the date of the underlying crime was no more than 3 years from reapplication. I just want to, tell you that these are changes to the victim compensation program here in Ohio as of March 30th of 2022. And that's literally like just a little bit over 3 years ago, right? And I just want to also acknowledge the amount of support and advocacy that has happened by folks in Ohio, right, in the different cities like Cincinnati, Columbus, here in Toledo, Cleveland, who have gone to Columbus, Ohio, to advocate for these changes to happen, right? That that they might not be just what we need today, but they're hopefully ready to move forward. The Office of Victims of Crime that the video that I showed earlier have actually lost some of their funding through the cuts that happened just a few months ago by the new administration, where they cut a lot of funding around intervention programs and health programs, and it also included this office, that I showed the video from. They were able to quickly allocate and get some of that funding back. But it's really, really important that we stay active, to our advocacy of why this resource matters, because it could be a life-changing process. Also on the website, you'll find this here that tells you that when you register, you'll register to file a claim online. You download and print an application to fill it out. Last night I was mentioning that it might be a good thing to just download it just for your own review process of what it looks like. What are some of the things that you're going to have to bring with you when you meet with an advocate or send it in or things of that nature, right? That you have the supporting documentation to your application, because that's how you're able to prove medical costs, burial costs, things of that nature, right? So you download your application, you fill it out, and you mail it to 230 East Broad Street on the 26th floor in Columbus, Ohio. And one of these things will come up, and then I'm going to send you a follow-up email with these key touch points right here, because they're kind of like the things that work with you. Another suggestion that they have is that the application, can also be emailed, to this crime victims compensation applications at Ohio, AGO.gov, but they must be attached as a PDF or a Word document. PDF gives you a very clean version of the application. You can attach it, no photos or screenshots of the pages will be accepted, right? So these are all, kind of like ways to get your application to move through, or they could also be disqualifiers and things that could hold you up, right? And then you can also download a supplemental application. Again, these are all available on the website. If you and your family are innocent victims of a violent crime, financial assistance may be available. We pay for a wide range of expenses such as medical, counseling bills, work loss, funeral expenses. We generally can't pay for property expenses. Earlier it talked about some things being paid for, and then it tells you some that might not, right? So sometimes contradicting, So that's why it's important that we continue Anton's point, evolve the conversation of what the needs are to this specific community of Toledo, right? That are very different, perhaps, than what's happening in Cleveland or Cincinnati, right? That each community is different. If you have a following claim and each of the following statements are true, then you may be eligible for help. I talked about those earlier, and again, that crime was reported to law enforcement, and that the victim cooperated with the request of law enforcement. That's how often you're going to get your police report, which is often going to be needed in order to qualify you as a victim in the first place. So this again is the information I walked through earlier. And so what happens once you've applied? Once you've applied, you'll learn that you're waiting, right? You might be waiting for your application. How do you know if it was accepted or not? So this is one of the places that you can find out more about. At this Ohio Victims of Crime Compensation Program, there's a phone number. It's 614-466-5610. For specific case information, it's 800-582-2877. And then there's general information phone number, which is 877-5-VICTIM, right? So it's 582-2877. Not that one. 584-2846 is the one that ends with 5 victims. So those are numbers that you can call for general information, specific case information, or just general number, right? Local programs that serve victims. I love this one right here because this was coming up last night. Well, who do I go to? Like, who do I go to report? Who's going to help me fill out my application? I would say that even though the website tells you to download the application, fill it out, mail it in, that you probably don't do that as your first, way of submitting it. That it might be wise to find a victim advocate that could help you fill it out, so that you know that you're providing the right information for it, right? Because that could hold up your application. So this Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center, let me see if it takes me to this. Okay, cool. This is your website here. It gives you an opportunity to find free legal assistance for crime victims to protect and enforce their rights. So there's a whole area for victims, for professionals, about us, and ways to give, right? So this is a great organization, Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center, right? So it's available to help you find a crime advocate, a victim advocate that could again help you navigate that application process, because I think that that's what's the critical thing once you have applied, is that you want to know what's happening, right? You submit the claim, they will verify your expenses and gather information from law enforcement. It's like, how do you know you even submitted all that? That's why the victim advocate becomes critical. They're kind of like your checking all of that stuff, Plus, you're dealing with trauma, right? You're dealing with trauma. You're dealing with the experience of losing a loved one, you yourself being harmed. Like, how do you even go get these resources, right? How do you even access law enforcement when sometimes law enforcement doesn't have a good connection to the community, right? Like, how do you navigate those? So a lot of times that buffer becomes your victim advocate, right? That person or organization that can help you kind of move through that process a little bit smoother. They will also, and then these are the things that they're checking, right? They will check for benefits that you may have received or are entitled to receive from other sources like workers' compensation or private insurance. Remember, you have to use those sources before victim compensation will cover your claims. Then an assistant from the Attorney General's office reviews the information and issues a written decision within 120 days of the claim was received. So the claim was received, and then you have 120 days to hear back, right? The average length of the process time to process an application for claim eligibility is 105 days, right? So if 105 days is gonna take for that application to be reviewed, then the assistant attorney general receives it, and then there's another 120 days attached to that. That's about 245 days. That's about 2/3 of a year right there, right? So these are like critical timelines for you to expect, kind of, reimbursement and things of that nature. And that's why it's important that your application is submitted in an impeccable manner, meaning that you cross your T's, dotted your I's, that you submitted all the documentation needed so that this process is not even further prolonged. And how good your advocate is going to be really, really important, right? Any questions so far? Just comments, feedback on anybody who's experienced this so far? Does it even make sense right now? You're like, damn. Because remember, what is the cap? The cap is what? Maximum cap is what? 50,000, I know the brother talked about life insurance earlier. You're like, I would do all that for 50,000?
So how much after, how many years do you have after something happens?
To submit, 3 years.
Two, but I have an uncle that had a cousin that, right on to the other. So. He would have been eligible.
I mean, most likely, if they deem them a victim, yes, right? Because again, what gives credibility to you being a victim is what? The police report, right? In the police report, that's what they write, victim. So that key word is that, right? So I think that one of the things that we have found is that there's ways to appeal, there's ways to ask for extensions and all that. But again, I would start in this special case. I would start with this Ohio victim rights, Ohio Crime Victim Justice Center, just to get some really good information, because there you have lawyers and things of that nature, right? That in a very specific department, to kind of gain that. I think that where we land as Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, we're more like, kind of like this space, right? Like we're a group of professionals. Some of us are kind of like, standing for something bigger than just settling, right? And we were like, hey, there has to be something on the other side of that, right? And we just kind of said, like, what's really happening, right? Like in California, there's 58 counties, and each county has its own victims program designed to help. And we found that, the denial rate for Black victims around victim compensation was the greatest, right? Like denials. And then there was a whole another factor around people, why they were being denied is because of the preconceived notion that that person was a reason why the crime happened in the first place, right? So meaning that, remember the disqualifiers were what? If you're a part of your own crime, right? So you're like, oh, you're already guilty. It's like the whole thing around sexual assault that I used to hear a lot was like, well, why were you wearing that skirt? Or why were you at that club in the first place? Why were you even drinking, right? Like they're already really like telling you that you're responsible for your own. So again, these are the individuals who, in a very insensitive manner, already documenting you being responsible for your own crime. But I wouldn't give in. The time sounds like it's short enough where I think it's worth, going for it and at least getting that information, Go ahead. My screen went dark, huh? I think this thing has an auto shut off. It happened earlier. Thank you. Something happened. Yeah. You had your hand raised, sir?
Yeah, with the timeline, if somebody applied for a minor and it wasn't approved, and they turn 18, they still have that 3 years too, so they will have up until their 21st birthday to apply for their self. Because some people think that minors, if somebody applied for them, that they can't reapply, but if it wasn't access, if they didn't get the money, they can apply for their cell once they turn 18.
And there's a sliding scale. So say you're 16 and you say, yes, I consent. We just had a case with a young woman and she's 24, 25. It became coercion, promise of marriage, housing, financial stability, and it was just to bed her. The courts do say once you realize it was coercion and not consent, they will start from that day that you seek help with that. So like, that's why this is very important, so we can learn those things, because again, I'm still learning as we go, but that is something important for children and women to understand, is that that starts the day of the understanding that, hey, I'm a victim of crime, and you report that. So you could be 13, 16 when it happens, but it changes, that scale starts when you realize that you're a victim.
Okay, that's good to
Yeah.
know.
You know, again, every state is different, you know, and I think that, you know, each community, you know, unfortunately, right now, we're seeing a lot of, you know, less, funding opportunities for these kind of programs, but we were seeing like programs like develop and design their support systems, like in cultural, approaches, you know what I mean? Like, directly to the demographic of the community and stuff like that, versus it just being like one big general approach that's a lot of times leaves out, because the video center itself, like, it is designed for those communities with the greatest need, right? And we see often that the greatest need is often victimization translates to crime, and crime translates to what? Yeah, but you know, it also translates to a response with a lot of times law enforcement. So you have victimization, but it's categorized as crime. And then, so if you remove this, where people are vulnerable, then you have crime, then you have perpetrators, and the approach is perpetrators. You have a whole, if you research communities, you will find that the greatest need might not be filled with this kind of support, which is kind of like reverses, you know, in a way. Like, if I lost my brother when I was 10 years old. You know, my brother Oscar was murdered, and we didn't get any of this kind of help, you know. And I feel like, you know, I was talking to Coach earlier. She was telling me she coaches baseball, and I'm like, man, like I grew up loving baseball, you know, like it could have, I think it could have really made a difference in my life, you know, to play sports and stuff, you know. So I was like really, you know, captivated by her dedication to helping youth, you know, in that level of sports. And but the disconnection is huge. But law enforcement is a big, you know, I'm in LA. I think that they did a projection of how much money went into what they were calling riots over this whole immigration element. I think the city was like at $480 million or something in damages. But they broke it down, the cost analysis. 80% was towards law enforcement and overtime, you know, out of that $500 million. Like, how, like, you know, and the damages, you know, that justified that big response was, you know, real damage, you know, to businesses. But when you 80% is going towards law enforcement overtime, it kind of tells you how some of these budgets are often looked at, right? And how crime versus victimization is looked at too. So that's another critical element of how these monies are distributed. Because if that's true, then how does programs designed for the greatest need true, right? If we're not getting those resources that we don't know about them. So this is really, really good. If a no final award is made, the claimant or victim will have to repay the entire emergency award. So prior to that, it was talking about that emergency awards are also available when the victim or claimant suffer undue hardship if immediate economic relief is not obtained. So that means I really need the money, right? I really need the money, I don't have the money, and it only gives you the opportunity to go up to $2,000. If it's for a funeral, like, how many funerals are $2,000? Right, the brother was talking about how the GoFundMe, you gave that GoFundMe example. When we first started this, we didn't even have GoFundMe about 10+ years ago. We were talking about, that example was a car wash kind of element, you do a car wash, you're trying to raise money as a form of meeting these economic hardships. So the language fits our communities, right? But unfortunately, we're categorized as not often, and that's what we left out, right? All other available third-party resources, again, the Medicare, the Medi-Cal, personal, health insurance, workers' comp has to be paid out, before you're able to access the victim compensation, So Ohio will not give you until they make sure that you've used a lot of that or used it all, right? Again, because victim compensation is a payer of last resort. If victim compensation pays, then finds out that there was another source, they could make you repay it.
Is that the resource that applies to the victim? For example, if you have a 16-year-old or 21-year-old, and you are the parent now having to bury them, are they asking you to exhaust the resources on that victim or your own resources?
On that victim.
Okay.
Can I-
Now says, because we talk about those funding and insurances and whatnot, why is there so much red tape involved in getting $2,000 is not even gonna pay for cremation insurance?
Yeah.
So why is you have to wait close to a year? I mean, is it that the personnel is on the personnel to work to get through the paperwork? Why does it take 200+ days to try and get the victim's family some funds to help bury or take care of their loved ones or their children?
I mean, it's the biases, right? It's like, if you study the program itself is designed, for this specific reason to help us, but the red tape is just a lot to navigate. There's ways around it, but, sometimes the victim advocate is not willing to go far enough. Most victim advocates will, have their offices within law enforcement, stations. So like either at the sheriff's office or at the PDs themselves, because that's who's doing the report. So they're like, oh, call so-and-so, like, at least in my experience. I have another brother that was murdered in 2012, and I remember it happened in the community where I grew up in. So I went to that police station and I met with, the lead detective, and he gave me the business card. And I remember speaking to my brother's wife, the next of kin in this case. I was like, hey, he gave me this card, by the way, have you called? And they're like, no, she's talking to the kids, my brother's sons and daughter about what happened to their dad, and she's thinking about funeral and on all these other things. And of course, I kind of stepped in and helped her be that connection. And that's how I was able to learn about kind of these systems. But I think that to your point, in that case, the navigator made a whole lot of stuff available to her. But this was in California, right? So I think some advocates, I don't know if we covered it already, but it talks about, so like look at these things right here. Common reasons for denial. Survivors who apply must often submit overwhelming paperwork, right? We're talking about all the supporting documentation. Applications are not filed within the time limit. Failure to report to police. Failure to cooperate with law enforcement, victim, witness, or coordinator, and other official required by the program. Incomplete information, contributory misconduct. So if I get upset a little bit or a lot or anything in between, you know, that person might just not like me anymore. And they might choose not to help me, right? So that could be a bias right there in itself, right? So, I think that, the crime is deemed ineligible, the application might be deemed ineligible. So these are a lot of, things that have kept us from this valuable resource. I've always looked at this resource as a lifesaver, a crime reduction strategy in a sense, right? Because if I know Anton, you know, did something to me or my family, but I'm able to get the right type of counseling, the right type of psychological support, something that, you know, deviates me to maybe go and play some sports and, you know, counseling and, you know, I might just be like, brother, you know what, we good, right? Like, you know, versus I stay, you know, active in my mind, then I could just be like, man, I can't wait till I find Anton coming out the library. Because that's how a lot of these things happen. You know, some of our people are actually trying to do good and we get caught up in this whole, you know, because to healing, you know, in the hood, what is the option to healing? If we wanna, when crime happens, what is option? I grew up with a certain type of mindset, you know?
It's a hood justice.
And what is that?
So like, they got us, we gonna get them.
Retaliation.
And one thing about victims' compensation, it's a legislative move, so it's perceived that it's a reimbursement. It's perceived. I didn't notice until the last 6 months, but when I did find Ocean Jones and we were looking for Kamani, I was telling people on Facebook, please do not start GoFundMe's for them. I get the intention, but the intention of politicians and the funders who already have the funding, they're researching why not to give you the funding. And I'm just being honest. You have us showing you the navigation portals to get it done faster, or, you know, contact us so we can, you know, get on their back. I had one case where a brother was told, no, you have a felony. Why are you applying? He said, Anton told me. They was like, well, go tell Anton. So I called CSSJ and then they sent me the information instantly. So it wasn't that point where I was egregious or aggressive or even let the client be aggressive, but I just presented the new rules and the new laws and legislation, and that solved it. I didn't even get a call back like, hey, but I did get it from the person who me and Shalice was helping saying, hey, they got my application on the road now. So I do want to say, they are doing it because we need them to do it. They're not doing it to say, hey, you're a victim. I see you were victimized. Let me give you a check. They want to say, hey, I see you a victim. Give me your proof and we'll approve you if you don't check any of those boxes. So that's what this is, so we can make sure that as a group, we don't check none of them boxes. So
Remember, I'm only an advocate. Not but go ahead, ask the
First
question.
of all, when was the program established?
Victims come, the vocal in 1984.
1980?
The federal law, yes.